2, 1. You wouldn't think that art has much to do with the world's largest woman, but we're going to tie all that together right here, and if that sounds interesting, stay with us on To the Point.
To the Point. Presented by Rice University.
Welcome to our program. My name is Scott Hochberg. With us is David Parsons, who is officially Emeritus Professor of Art and Art History at Rice University. And emeritus tends to imply one who has retired from the scene, but that is certainly not the case with David Parsons. If anything, I think he's more active and involved in the university and in the art experience here at Rice than he ever was. It's good to have you on the program. I think this might be the first time we've had you here, and it's a pleasure to have you. Mm-hmm. How long were you officially a non-retired professor at Rice University?
28 years.
Which is quite a long time.
Yes.
Quite a bit of tenure. You've seen the growth of the art department quite a many ways.
Well, there wasn't any when I came. I was teaching in architecture, teaching all the architecture students for 3 years. Each student had 3 years of drawing at that time. And so it was almost 10 years before it was successful. I started taking on students, anyone who wanted to study sculpture, things of that sort. And eventually we did get an art department.
And your particular area of expertise or study is sculpture and casting, correct?
Well, it's sculpture in all the different areas it involves. But the casting came about because during the war, I was the surgical artist for the Army Chief of Plastic Surgery for 3.5 years at Valley Forge Hospital. And so as such had made well over 1,000 face casts relating to battle injuries and then the reconstruction of them. And so that's how I got involved in this particular situation. The Professor Hull from the anthropology department knew of that background. And when he received a call asking for help, someone who could make a cast, he immediately recommended they get in touch with me.
Right. Well, that would be the logical choice. I mentioned at the beginning of the program that we were talking about that the world's largest woman had something to do with this show, and I think I'm best off, rather than trying to explain it myself, to let you bring that person into this story and just sort of give us the background on really quite an unusual thing that you have been doing.
Well, I had just finished getting my last grades in, and everything was all set for a relaxing summer. And
your first summer in retirement, basically.
No, this was about 12 years ago.
Oh, okay.
And when I got home, I found there was just commencement the next day, and it was two days away. And when I got home, I found a message: please call this number, and a long-distance number. And I did so, not knowing what it was about. And they said, we understand that you could make a cast of a body. You've done face cast, things of that sort. We have a very large woman that we want to get a cast of. And there was something about the Smithsonian, and it was a sort of a confusing phone conversation, but the upshot of it was that, I said, I've been recommended by Dr. Hull, and would I be willing to do it? If I did, meet them at Highlands by a filling station there, a particular one, and bring along equipment. We'd be going to Lake Charles to do it. And so I decided, well, I might as well help out on this. It could be interesting. And there was no mention of any fees, anything of that sort. It was well, I went out and got supplies that I anticipated I might need. Conduit, heavy gauge conduit for reinforcing a cast, and drop cloths and pails and things I'd be using, spatulas and the like.
Did you have an idea? Did they tell you who the subject was?
No, just she was a very large woman.
Okay.
And so when I went out and met them, it turned out this was a woman who had been 8 foot 9.5 tall, and she was quite large.
You better say that again, because I think a couple of heads probably just turned and said, "Did he really say that?"
8 foot 9.5 tall, and I think that's about 18 inches taller than Wilt Chamberlain, around that general area. And she had died the day before in Ben Hobb Hospital.
Here in Houston.
Yes, and her body had been shipped over to Lake Charles, and supposedly I was to do the work in St. Pat's Hospital there, where I'd have the facilities for such things. When we got over there, well, now the people in the car, there was the widower and his sister, who was a school teacher from New York City,
Mm-hmm.
and then the widower's employer, who was the one who had called me, and he owned the filling station there, and his wife, and then the five of us drove over there. Well, the widower began asking, would the plaster hurt his wife's body? He didn't want anything to hurt her
Right.
at all. And now he was a man about 6 foot tall, and very active, athletically built. But he was very much concerned until I assured him, but it took most of the trip to Lake Charles to assure him that it wouldn't hurt her skin at all.
Mm-hmm.
That on his skin or even on mine, it would just be warm.
Right.
And I promised him that I would only make one cast, and that is one positive from the negative we made, and that would be used just for medical purpose, because that's what I'd understood
Mm-hmm.
from the conversation.
How old was this woman?
I would judge about 22, and I know very little about it except that they said she had been a perfectly normal young girl, was playing in a basketball tournament in Lake Charles. She was from Jennings, and had some sort of injury, a fall, something of the sort, that activated her pituitary gland, caused it to go haywire. And then she began to grow excessively. They had said an inch a month.
Mm-hmm.
I figured it was probably half an inch a month over the period of time. I don't know how tall she was at the start.
That's still incredible.
But it would be reasonable at, say, half an inch a month of growth. And I know that, found out later, she had been in and out of a couple of hospitals, one in New Orleans, one in Minneapolis, before she came here. She was having difficulty at times with balance.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were trying to stop the growth, an operation on the pituitary gland. And it was, from what I gathered later from the doctors, it was edema, or just the lungs couldn't handle being bedridden for a long time
Mm-hmm.
with her size.
Yeah.
And so they wanted a body cast of her, and there was again talk of the Smithsonian. The last time I heard that mentioned was in the car. Well, we went over there and found out that I wouldn't be making the cast in the hospital at all, because she'd been taken to a mortuary to be embalmed, and they couldn't get a crew to lift her and bring her back to the hospital.
So you had to go over to the mortuary.
So I had to do the work in the mortuary, and it was for various reasons I was asked to come back after dark and work at night. Work through the night, because there were going to be quite a number of funeral services
Right.
the next day. And so I did, and in the embalming room where I was working, which was a very tiny little room, and her body almost filled it, the formaldehyde machine was leaking, and those who were going to help me were smokers.
Oh my.
And you can't be a smoker and
Right.
be around a lot of formaldehyde.
Right.
And so I had to work alone, except in the very late hours of the morning, the husband did help me some. But then we brought the mold back, and I cast up the positive that we have here.
Mm-hmm.
And then in discussions with the man who had asked me to do it, turned out he wanted me to do a back to it, which I said no, I wouldn't, because that would be faking it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was considering this purely a medical record.
Right.
And so I cast whatever I was able to capture at that particular time.
Right.
We had to work very fast. And then more recently, I gave a talk about the casting experience over at one of the colleges, Will Rice College. And one of the girls there, named McNutt, told me her father had just come on from Virginia to handle public relations for Baylor Medical School. May she bring him over? And so he did, and that's how we established contact again they asked me if I would prepare it so they could be in their anatomy department.
What had been done with this cast over the?
I just
12
had
years?
kept it, hoping that someday someone would recognize its value.
Okay, so the interest at the time was not with any specific use in mind, but just that you better get it then as a historical record.
Since I had it, well, what had happened when she died, as I understand it, the Air Force people were very much interested in getting her skeleton because they were studying giantism.
Mm-hmm.
All sides of it, I mean, whether it was a genuine dwarfism or giant, it's part of the same general phenomena
Right.
of abnormality. And the woman had told her husband, "Don't let them cut me. I just want to be buried." And up in my hometown, and let go at that. And so he was adamant in not letting them take the body for autopsy or for dismembering, just taking the skeleton. But it was the keen interest that particularly the employer saw in the Air Force people. It caused him to call the White House. We'd go to a payphone, call the White House, and tell them about it. And so the Surgeon General was brought into the picture, and he designated a surgeon from Tulane University to come over to Lake Charles to do a small autopsy. Anyway, we finally agreed on just a very small one to examine some of the organs,
Mm-hmm.
but not to do any major cutting on her at all. But that's how that whole thing got started. There was anticipation that her body was of value in a recording of her size.
Has there been any significant work that has come out of this? I mean,
Not that I don't know. Now, I had conversations with the doctor who'd done the operation later, and he was off for San Antonio where they discovered a true case of dwarfism,
Mm-hmm.
and said this will be of equal importance to us in what we're looking for. And I've had no contact with him since.
The growth process is still one of the more mysterious
Yes.
parts of human anatomy.
Because now, in her case, everything seemed to develop equally. The
Mhm.
hands are almost twice the size of my hands, beautifully formed. And she seemed in good proportion. From the photographs and from the viewing, the lower leg seems very shrunken, but that's the case of anyone who's been in bed because they've had a broken leg or
Mhm.
something of the sort.
Right.
And the first part of the body that seems to diminish is the lower leg. It just, not being used, loses a lot of its body.
I want to mention one other thing before we come to the end of the program. It's on a little different tangent, but you mentioned you're putting together a show of your own works.
Well, this will be the first go of the newly formed Council for the Arts in Bel Air,
Mm-hmm.
or Arts Council of Bel Air, and it'll be at the Bel Air City Hall in just opening January 24th.
How long is it going to be there?
I was asked to have a retrospective show, so I'll be having works dating from 1932. I think that'll be about the earliest, on at the present time. Probably about 32, 33 pieces in general. Now, some of those pieces will include lots of the bricks for the rice building and the wood pattern and so forth.
Well, that'd be a whole
So
show
it'll be
in
a
itself to
lot
talk
more
about.
items than just 32.
Right. If you happen to get by the city of Bel Air, if you're in the Houston area, go on by after the 23rd of January.
24th.
24th of January, and stop in and see it. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. David Parsons has been our guest, and a rather unusual story to tell, and certainly an interesting one. It's been a pleasure to have you here. Good luck to you.
Thank you.
I'm Scott Hochberg. Join us again next week on To the Point.
To the Point is produced by Information Services in the Language Lab at Rice University.